So we're going to shift now to really drill down into data around many of the issues that Professor Sheridan raised. And I'm delighted we have a plenary address from Professor Trina Shanks, who is at the University of Michigan, and she and I have the distinct honor of having both been trained by Michael Sheridan. And as a matter of fact, we were in the same doctoral cohort together, and I can attest that she was by far the smartest one in the group. So in addition to being a Rhodes Scholar, she has a brilliant mind around social policy and social innovation, and has gone on then to develop a career that is testing a range of interventions in Detroit as well as communities across the United States. And she has specifically continued on a longitudinal study that has looked at the impact of 529s on kids. She actually, they met with a few of our doctoral students this morning, and she talked about how it's about the long game, right? When you really want to assess outcomes. And when you started, the kids had just been born, right? Preschool. They were in preschool, and now they're finally seniors in high school. So she's really getting at that question that was raised earlier around how is this going to influence their life trajectory. So it's wonderful to have her here to provide some framing remarks on the grand challenge around reducing extreme economic inequality. Then we'll move into our panel that we have a range of state and local leaders that are here to talk about how they have tried to take these concepts and put them into practice both in policy and in programs. So please join me in welcoming Professor Shanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this on? First of all, I'd like to thank Amanda and Jeff and Abby and all the ones who helped make this happen and inviting me to come. It's been a great day, and I look forward to having. As has been said, I help lead the grand challenge in reducing extreme economic inequality. So I'll go a little deeper into some of the details of this particular grand challenge and talk about extreme economic inequality in the United States context. And then a theoretical frame for thinking about how economic security actually influences child outcomes. And then talk a little bit about policy considerations, but I also look forward to what the panel has to say about what you're doing locally here in Colorado and the Denver area. So, of course, this is the Grand Challenge. If you want to see any of the papers or any of the background, you can definitely go to the website. It's on here. I also would like to at least mention my co-leads. So Laura Lane, who's also at the University of Michigan, and Jenny Ramich, who's at the University of Washington. They help co-lead this Grand Challenge with me. And so I appreciate being able to work with these wonderful people trying to think about this very big Grand Challenge. So, starting out. If you're thinking about income inequality, and just to make the distinction, since Michael Sheridan talked about this a little long ago, income is what you make in a week or a month or a year that kind of flows in and out. And most of it you used to spend to buy things to support you and your family. And so I'm going to first talk about income inequality, and then I'm going to shift to wealth inequality, because it's not what you make over a period of time, it's what you're able to hold on to, and usually across generations. So I'm starting with income inequality, and just so you can see what this this graph shows, it shows the top 1% of income holders in the United States. And you'll notice that the other time that income inequality was really, really extreme in the United States, it was just before the stock market crash, or the roaring 20s when things were kind of going wild and crazy. It was 23%. And then after World War II, it actually almost went in half and even lower. So it got as low as 8.9% in the mid-70s. But if you look over the last 5 to 10 years, it's back up to 22%. So it's just as high as it was just before the huge stock market crash of 1929. And so we had a period when we were doing better, but we're getting to a point where it's becoming more extreme in the United States. So again, this is the top 1% holding about a quarter of all income in the United States. And when you see wealth, you'll see it's even more extreme, but just keep that in mind. And then you want to look at what that really means. So the top 1% in the United States makes over $1.3 million. The top 1/10 of 1%, which is really where a lot of the growth is in this country, is over $6 million. This is income. So this is what they make in a year on average. And what you'll notice is that the bottom 90%, so the bottom 9/10 of the United States, on average makes $34,000. So look at how, we talk about extreme economic inequality, this is where it is in income in the United States. The other thing to look at is if you look at what's been happening over time, almost all the growth in after-tax income has gone to the top 1%. So not the 99%, not the 80 percentile. It's not just the bottom that isn't doing as well. It's the top 1% that's been having the huge growth in this country. And I thought Michael would talk about this a little bit, so I won't say a lot about it. But it's policies and it's decisions that we made have led to this. It's not just, oh, income inequality happens. No, it's that the things that have been going on and decisions that have been made about tax policy and other policies that have led to these huge extremes where all the benefits of our country have gone to the top 1%, top 1/10 of 1%, top 15%, and very little toward the bottom, right? And so if you want to look at this in terms of wages, it's even more easy to see, and that the top 10%, there's been real growth in wages since 1979. In the bottom 10%, it's been declining in real wages. So they actually have had a decrease from $404 a week to $397 over this period, and then the median has gone up a little bit, but again, the growth has been at the very, very top. And so one way to think about this is why? Why is this happening? And one statistic that we're actually beginning to collect more now is what does the CEO of a company make compared to the average worker? So if you go back as recently as 1980, it was about 42 to 1. That's about what other developed countries in the in the world have. So if you look at Japan or Austria or Denmark, it's around that 40 to 50 to 60 to 1%. But in the late 90s, the CEO to worker ratio went up to 525 to 1. And it's a little better now at 347 to 1, but we're much higher than any other country in the world. And then it's even worse by industry. So I just happened to look this up. If you look at the fast food industry, the CEO of McDonald's makes 3,000 times more than the average worker. And Dunkin' Donuts, it's 48 to 1. But so the extreme even within industries. But this is showing what happens. So when it goes to the top 1%, the top 1/10 of 1%, that means one or two individuals make a lot more, and everybody else has been staying about the same. This is what's happening is in the US, and this is just one indicator of it. Another way to think about this is that in the US, productivity has been growing over this whole time. So because of automation, because of budget cuts, because of different things, actually corporations are making more money and being more productive, but that productivity gain isn't translating to hourly compensation. So hourly compensation has been pretty stagnant, but productivity growth has been increasing. So you can't say that corporations have been doing better, they just have been passing that largesse, if you will, onto the average worker. And then, as has been mentioned by Michael and by Jeff Jensen and others, there are huge disparities by race. So this actually shows, again, over time, there's been slight movement upward, but the differences and the disparities are about the same. So typically, blacks or African Americans are at the bottom, Hispanics or Latinos are a little bit better, and then non-Hispanic whites are doing better, and to some extent, Asians are doing a little bit better, even though it's important, as some work I've done with other organizations in the past, there's a lot of disparities within the Asian population. So even though on average they're doing better, some subgroups like Vietnamese and Cambodians and aren't doing as well, but if you look by race, there's, again, huge differences in income. And so now I shift to wealth. And again, wealth is what you hold, so it's not what you earn over a period of time. So if you take everything of value that you hold, all the assets that you have, and subtract whatever you owe, that kind of gives you a sense of your net worth or your wealth. And so you'll notice this isn't the top 1%, this is the top 10th of 1% in the United States, and they hold almost a quarter of wealth in the US. And again, the only time it's been this high in the past was right around 1929 when we had the huge stock market crash. So you can see over time, it went down a little bit, but again, we're at a point where we have increasing inequality in wealth, where the top 10th of a percent own huge proportions of the wealth, and the bottom have zero or negative wealth. You can't even calculate it because it's so low, right? So this is what's been happening in the US in terms of wealth. And if you want to look at exactly what that means, who has what, again, this isn't the top 10% or 1%. This is actually going back to quintiles, so we're looking at fifths here. But what's important here, because it looks at 2000, 2011, at the bottom, where many people, if they had net wealth, it was tied up with their home and how much money they had in home equity. With the mortgage crisis and the Great Recession between 2007 and 2009, a lot of people lost their home value, lost home equity, and you'll notice that at the top, because people may have had a couple of homes, but they also had money in stocks, and they bounced back. So from 2000 to 2011, the top 40%, the fourth quintile and the fifth quintile, they actually recovered after the recession. But the bottom three quintiles, they haven't gotten better. So they're actually doing worse in 2011 than they were in 2000. And if you notice, the bottom quintile, they started out negative and they're more negative. So they don't even have over 0 to count. So not only is it extreme, but those at the bottom have 0 or negative, and they haven't recovered after the recession like those at the top have. This is kind of what I mean when I say extreme economic inequality in the United States regarding wealth. And again, there's huge racial wealth gaps. And I want to just take a moment to kind of emphasize here that there's income inequality in the US, but wealth inequality is even more extreme. So if you looked at that median income by race, African Americans and Latinos maybe made 60 to 70% of what non-Hispanic whites made. And so that's a disparity, and you want to reduce that, but at least you're in the same ballpark. When you're looking at wealth, African American and Latino families have maybe 5 to 10 cents for every dollar that's held in wealth. So rather than 60 to 70%, it's 5 to 10 cents. So I mean, that's huge disparities. And again, when you look at the bottom, people are actually 0 negative. They don't even have, the median net worth for African Americans is right around 0. So it's not just that they are less, but they don't have anything. And then even on, and if you look at these medians, it's 5 to 10 cents on the dollar, depending on what year and what data set you use. And so this is where it's very extreme. And the other thing to think about with this racial wealth gap, this is actually showing the same families over time, so it's not improving. So it starts out bad when you're in your 20s, and as you get older, it just grows and grows and gets worse. With the recession, it went down a little bit, but then it's starting to go the other direction again. So when you're looking at racial wealth gaps, even after the civil rights movement, even after educational attainment is getting better, racial wealth gaps are still huge and sometimes growing, depending on what years you look at. So if you think income inequality is bad, wealth inequality is worse. Okay, so that's kind of gives you a sense of where we're starting from and what we're talking about when we talk about extreme economic inequality in the United States. So with that context, I want to say, what does this mean for children and families? Why should we as social workers think about this? Who cares if the top 1% make a lot of money? You know, isn't everybody going to be okay? This just gives you a sense of what this actually means on the ground for children and families. So just to give a sense, the United States has much, much, much higher child poverty rates than almost every other developed nation. And some places are even a third of what we are. And it's not so much that other nations earn that much more, but it's that, again, there's policies and there's collective will to give back to families who have children so that they aren't as poor off or not as well off as they are in the United States. So there's things like child allowances. So if you have a child under a certain age, you get money back. And we have TANF here, but it's very, very stingy and it's not universal. So that you don't get the same reduction in child poverty because of policy in the United States as you do in some other countries. So that's why our numbers look so extreme. So that just shows how we look in kind of international context. This is, I think we missed, oh well, okay. This is some work that I've done based on the early childhood longitudinal study. So this looked at children who were born in 2001. So these are the children who are pretty much graduated from high school this year, right? So you show where they start out in terms of the economic circumstances of their family. And just so you kind of know what I'm talking about here, this isn't the poverty line. This is 1.85 of the poverty line, so a little bit more than the official poverty line. And you'll see that white and Asian households, the majority of them are in the most advantaged situation. So they're above 1.85 of the poverty line, and they have every asset that was measured in this data set. So they have a home, they have money in the bank, and they have stocks and bonds. You'll see in contrast, when you look at American Indian, African American, Latino, Native Hawaiian households, they're just the opposite. The majority of them are in the more disadvantaged situation. So they're below 1.85 of the poverty line, and they have 0 or no assets. So this is kind of at birth where people start out, right? And so then what does that mean? I ask this question a lot, one, because I know the answer and it's sad, but secondly, because I want you to think. If you had a developmentally appropriate assessment of a child, let's say at birth or at 3 years old or some kind of IQ test, is that the better predictor of what their long-term outcomes are going to be, or is it just the social and economic advantage in the household in which they're born? And if I gave this talk, I have a lot of examples of this, but I'll just give one right now or two right now. So this shows 8th grade test scores. So if you look at the lowest performing 8th graders who are in high income households, so that's the top 25% of income in this sample, they're more likely to complete college. So this is the lowest performing 8th graders. They're more likely at 30% if they're from high income households to complete college than the highest performing low income families. So 30%, so pretty much dumb, poor performing 8th graders are more likely to complete college if they come from an economically advantaged household than the brightest and highest performing 8th graders if they come from a low income household. And to bring this home a little bit more, if you look at where your household ranks in terms of income and the likelihood of being able to enroll in college, you'll see this is like 0.67 correlation. This is like the best you're probably going to get in social science. So if you're at the very bottom of the income distribution, you're maybe 15, 20% likely to enroll in college. If you're at the top of the income distribution, the most high income households, you're at 95%. So you're much more likely to go to college, complete college, if from your high income household or economically advantaged household than not. And so the question, I mean, we can ask why that is, and I'll give some thoughts about that, but just to show that it's not your ability, it's not your aptitude, it's not your potential. Correlations are much higher with the economic advantage of your family, where you're born, how you're born. And so I have this little theoretical frame to kind of think about what is this? What aspects of social and economic advantage starts to lead to these differential child outcomes, these disparities? So one is just financial and economic security. One is being in a secure, stable household, and then the kind of neighborhoods and schools you go to. I won't have time to go through this whole model, but the citations here if you're really interested, if you want to talk to me about it afterwards. But I think a couple things are happening. One, in the United States, income, assets, and education tend to go together, and they tend to be highly influenced by race and ethnicity, and it's not showing up here, but also by household structure. So if you're a married or coupled household as opposed to a single parent household. And so if you have education, income, and assets, or even worse, if you don't have levels of education, have zero or no assets, and don't have high income, then you're much more likely to face material hardship. Your family is more likely to have parental stress. And that leads to stress that the child can feel, and that leads to poor health, social, emotional, and it's not showing up on this, I'm not sure why, but academic and educational outcomes. And so this is kind of the general framework. Let's see what this next picture looks like. Oh, it's even worse. Okay, well, I'll just say that if you look at a tolerable or toxic stress framework, if you're in a tolerable stress household, first of all, you're more likely to have income, assets, and education, but you're less likely to have material hardship, you're less likely to have parental stress, you're more likely to have parental involvement, and if anything does happen, if someone in your family dies, if your parents have a mental health issue, you have supportive relationships that kind of help you get through it, so you still kind of have decent outcomes. But in toxic stress households, it's just the opposite. Oh, goodness. You don't have the income, assets, and education. You have higher levels of material hardship. You have more levels of parental distress. Then you're living in neighborhoods that have toxicity and environmental toxins and poor school systems. And then you also don't have the supports, whether in your family or in the institutions that you spend time in, to help you deal with the stresses. So you have things that happen kind of with the circuitry in your brain, and you react to things differently over time, and you start having poor outcomes in terms of health, social, emotional development, and cognitive outcomes. And so if you believe this theoretical framework, and if you could see it a little bit better, if you're in those households that are very, very low on the income distribution and have zero or negative net worth, you're going to be in neighborhoods and in school systems and have an opportunity structures that are different. And so this is kind of the take-home point. Even though we claim the mantra of being a land of economic opportunity, or a land of opportunity generally, we've drifted from collective infrastructures that serve all children and all families to very segregated spaces. And I don't just mean segregated in terms of geography, even though that also happens, but where there's different social networks, different opportunity sets, and so families and individuals are expected to kind of fend for themselves and do for themselves. And then you also have these huge economic disparities, so the people who are the least likely to be able to fend for themselves because they have low income, because they have low assets, are also the ones who don't have the supports to be able to make it through. And so hopefully our panel will give specific examples of these, but it happens in education at the K through 12 level, as well as access to post-secondary education. It happens with access to health care, both in terms of health insurance, as well as the quality of the services that you receive. It happens in terms of child care. So if you can't pay out of pocket for child care, the opportunity to actually have a space, or to have space at the times that you need, or to have consistency of child care is much less likely. Affordable housing is very different, or the kind of housing you can find. Access to food and transportation. Actually, when I give this presentation, I show pictures. I say, would you rather live in these kind of houses where there's either lots of vacant land, lots of abandoned homes, very, very small, lots of crime, or, you know, kind of the new suburban type houses? Would you rather go to grocery stores that have a Whole Food on one corner, or a Trader Joe's in another corner, and all the big chain grocery stores, or just a neighborhood liquor store that doesn't have fresh fruits and vegetables? You got to go on and on and on that. And I have pictures of those things, but you can imagine, you know, if you're in one type of space where most of the people are low income and don't have many assets, what those resources look like, as opposed to spaces where people who are higher income and have assets, what they have access to. And those things translate explicitly to the opportunity sets that children face. And so I would say that is unfair. I would say that's something that social workers should try to fight against, but it's actually the implications and the impact of having these extreme economic disparities that we have in this country. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about policy considerations, but I don't wanna claim to say all the answers, but I do have just a couple of ideas, and I'd love to hear kind of what things are happening on the ground in these areas. So if you're thinking about possibilities for change in terms of income, you could think of trying to increase earnings. So a lot of the minimum wage campaigns, the universal basic income campaigns, child allowances that happen in other countries, there's ways to just give people more money directly. There's trying to make part-time shift and variable work more stable and humane. So rather than, you know, sometimes you get a lot of hours, sometimes you don't get hours, if people don't show up, you don't get work, not knowing from week to week, day to day when you're gonna work, and so that makes it hard to know what your income's gonna be, make it hard to budget and plan. Changing work to make it better. That also mean having better benefits. Trying to expand the earned income tax credit, which is a huge success in our country in terms of trying to bring some income to low to moderate income families, but it's for people who work a certain number of hours, and it's usually for families that have children. So for single parents or people who have part-time work, it needs to be expanded more. Having better child care to help enable stable employment. Expanding active employment creation. So this could be things like internships, it could be things like paid service, it could be things like jobs of last resort, but rather than just saying, oh, well, the economy's not doing well, we have high unemployment, too bad, you know, you're not employable, maybe you ought to do something to get some skills, you know, maybe we should have employment creation so that if you want to work, there's options where you can at least earn something, and that doesn't really exist on a widespread basis in the United States, even though it does in some other countries. And then strengthening unemployment insurance. So during times when you aren't employed, you can have longer periods to be able to prepare for and find other employment. And so again, those are real quick. We have some policy briefs if you want to look at some of the details, but those are some possibilities for change at the income side. And then if you look at possibilities for change at the wealth side, reduce the role of wealth and income in building human capital. So all those graphs I showed that depending on where you are in income and wealth determines how far you're gonna go in school, if we can find ways to disconnect that. I know some schools are trying to say, you know, if you get in, you won't have to pay the full amount if you're very low income, and those things are good, but because typically the most disadvantaged kids aren't even applying, it hasn't quite had the impact, but if we could find more and more ways to reduce the role of wealth and income and actually allowing people to build human capital, that would be a big thing in this country. Stop privileging income from capital over income from labor. So we have all of these tax policies that you have preferred tax treatment if it's in stocks and bonds and businesses, but if it's from income from labor, not so much. I thought Michael would talk a little bit about this, but I don't have the graphs here, but we spend lots and lots and lots of money in this country giving tax benefits for retirement, so for IRAs, for 401ks, for 403bs, and almost all of it goes to the top 15 to 20%, very, very little goes to the bottom. So how can we, whether it's through an asset building program or whether it's through redistribution programs, but finding ways to get those tax subsidies go to the bottom and not just to the top. I would say the same with shelter. So rather than having all of our money that goes to the tax code for home ownership to just go through the home mortgage interest deduction. And again, if you have mega mansions or one or two homes, all of that seems to go toward the top, and very.
Good afternoon. Did I just turn the mic off? Or can you hear me? Okay. All right. I'm excited to be here today. Whoops, I broke the mic. All right. It is a value of Denver Housing Authority to empower our clients, low income, to improve their lives. And I'm here today to talk to you about our economic self-sufficiency programming and our efforts to reduce extreme economic inequality. At DHA, we work to help people move from poverty, frequently generational poverty, to economic self-sufficiency, and sometimes to home ownership, which, as you probably know, is a big wealth builder. I'm here to share, I'm going to share some demographics with you to create a picture of the families that we serve, and I'd like you to try to hold on to this picture as I share later the accomplishments that have been realized by these same economically challenged people. DHA is a landlord in Denver. We provide housing to over 11,000 households and 26,000 people. What a lot of people don't realize is that half of those people, 26,000 people, are children. About 6,500 are seniors or people with disabilities, and about 6,500 are adults. Now, of that last group, the adults, half of them are single parents with kids under the age of 12, which significantly impacts ability to move to economic self-sufficiency for a while. 30% of our households make, 30%, says over 8,000 households make less than $20,000 a year. 96% of our households make less than $40,000 a year. 89% of DHA's residents are minority. 75% of DHA's heads of households are women. Resident and Community Services, which is a department that I work in, provides supportive services to all the residents of public housing in Section 8 in 4 main areas: economic self-sufficiency, aging in place, youth development, and community building. FSS, Family Self-Sufficiency, is a critical program at DHA. This is a HUD program, so when you want to replicate it, you have to remember it's a HUD program for housing authorities. It's a HUD program for residents of public housing in Section 8. DHA also created and offers a homeownership program for residents and the public. In FSS and homeownership, our residents work with personal advisors to improve their financial viability so that they can get into Home Buyers Club, which is the advanced level of the homeownership program. Free services are offered to participants to assist them as they work to attain economic self-sufficiency and hopefully a mortgage if that's possible for them in 5 main areas: income, debt, credit, savings, and job stability. The main goal of FSS is full-time employment. At DHA, subsidized housing at DHA means residents pay 1/3 of their income to rent, and DHA pays the difference. As income goes up, rent goes up. So this is a disincentive to a lot of residents. They don't want to pay more rent. FSS is a great program. It helps with this. As FSS participants increase their income and they pay more rent, this money gets set aside for them into an FSS escrow account, which they can cash out when they meet the goals of their program. The goals that FSS clients must meet to graduate, and this is a 5-year program, include they must be working full-time, they must have income that's up to or above 150% of the federal poverty level, they need to have debt that's either less than 15% of their monthly income or they've reduced their derogatory debt by at least 25%. They need a credit score of 620, and they need to have no TANF income. Keep in mind, when I talk about home ownership, sometimes people think, well, that's the goal. Home ownership is an ideal, but we're talking about people often coming from generational poverty, educationally and economically challenged. That's a hard goal to hit. So home ownership is a significant accomplishment, but it's not the only indicator of financial improvement. Significant financial goals that have been realized, significant financial goals are always met as people are working towards home ownership. So in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, I want to share some outcomes that we've seen from clients of the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. 247 clients, last 2.5 years, raised their income a total of $2,198,000. 210 clients decreased their debt a total of $614,000. 141 clients raised their credit score over 11,000 points. 40 clients in that time period graduated from FSS and earned their escrow account. Total, over 783,000, which averages about $20,000 a person. This is tax-free. They can do whatever they want with it. We do our jobs right. They're wanting to work towards home ownership and self-sufficiency. 19 of these graduates bought a home. Several of them are still working with DHA advisors on the goal of home ownership. Since 2010, 81% of DHA's FSS graduates, 81%, have moved out of DHA in subsidized housing. Additional services and benefits for residents of DHA through the homeownership program include down payment and closing cost assistance, competitive loan products, DHA's matching savings account, which is an idea I got from Dr. Sheridan. We match $1 for every dollar they deposit, up to $1,500 when they buy a house. DHA's Incentive Plus classes, those of you that work with clients like I do know that going to class is not always the most popular thing people want to do. So we offer Incentive Plus. They get a $20 coupon for every class that they go to. They can redeem all of these coupons for cash at closing when they buy a house. 205 DHA residents have bought a home through DHA's homeownership program. 148 of them had a matching savings account. 19 had an individual savings account. 38 had a United Way individual development account. So over 75% of the clients who purchased a home had some kind of matching savings account. Wayne State University and Case Western University completed a 17-year longitudinal study of DHA's homeownership program led by Dr. Ana Santiago, and they found the following. 90% of DHA's homeowners bought homes in better neighborhoods than they moved from. Compared to DHA residents who bought homes without working with DHA's homeownership program, DHA graduates had a 55% lower probability of foreclosure, a 31% lower cost burden, and 19% lower debt-to-income ratio. DHA homeownership buyers gained in home equity, while non-program owners lost equity. By 2008, when the foreclosure crisis here was in full swing, DHA's homeowner graduates had, so economically and educationally challenged single-parent families, often generational poverty. Our clients had slightly lower foreclosure rates than the city of Denver. They had significantly lower foreclosure rates than other DHA residents who dropped out of the homeownership program or did not join the homeownership program. Homeownership participants saw significant gains in income and significant increases in personal savings. According to the study, DHA's homeownership program yields a net positive benefit of $776,439 per 100 enrollees. According to the study, DHA's homeownership program can be justified not only on equity grounds, such as improving the well-being of participants, but on social efficiency grounds, producing more benefits to non-participants than they pay to operate the program, plus any other costs. The study evidences, according to Dr. Santiago, a high degree of statistical confidence that DHA's homeownership program produced substantial net benefits to society as a whole.
I told you, Denver's got one of the best housing authorities, and that's why. Renee, thank you so much. I'd like now to ask Katie Ruggero to address from the state level in the Department of Human Services. There's a division that is focused on employment and benefits, and she has been there for several years and is now the director of that division, and we look forward to hearing the state's perspective, and then I love it because then we've actually got the county perspective, how it actually plays out at the local level. Katie, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we work together with the county and state partnership and how kind of the customer voice meets practice, then meets policy making, and how that all comes through. And I'm going to highlight for you some very specific programs where they're evidence-based. We didn't try anything new, but we've deployed those evidence-based programs in order to really create better outcomes for individuals who are living in poverty. Really, I've had the pleasure of working, and you heard from Jareen and Executive Director Vika for 8 years now. And what they've done is they've really set the tone for understanding that for individuals who are in poverty, what means most to them often is more dollars in their hands so that they can address whatever needs that they're having at that particular time. And so really, what we work on within my division and many others that are public assistance programs are those programs that look at employment, earnings, and retention, and how can we make sure that we have very specific policies in place for that, job training and vocational and post-secondary education, and then building wealth and money management, assets limits and cliff effect. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and why that's important when we're making policy at the state level. Basically, the premise is we don't want to just help individuals get a job. We really need to help them get a good paying job and be able to sustain or advance in that career. And so there are very specific policies, again, very specific evidence-based strategies that can be deployed in order to really help these individuals as they are getting a job and then preparing for the next job. One of the most notable changes that have been made over time, and this is our TANF program, the Temporary Aid for Needy Families program, is what we called or deemed Colorado Reworks. So it was mentioned earlier that we moved from AFDC into TANF, and we've had 20 years of data to really help us understand what of that program, both AFDC, then TANF, what of that works and what of that really doesn't work for families. And what we found as we worked with this with our county partners and with customers of our program was the simple thing of having to turn in paperwork monthly just to stay eligible was getting in the way of being able to look for a job and get the right training and education. Things such as asset limits doesn't help them save. In fact, it's prohibiting them from even being eligible for our programs. In some instances, it was kicking them off the programs just because they were trying to save a little bit. This particular piece here, and for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with the Temporary Aid for Needy Families, there's one federal measure that states are required to meet, and that's the work participation rate. And what the work participation rate generally measures is the progress or the process that somebody is undertaking in order to receive benefits. In Colorado, we've decided that that's not what's going to be most meaningful for our families. Certainly, there are some activities within that that is helpful, but again, the sure step out of poverty for many of these families is through employment. So TANF generally doesn't measure whether or not somebody has retained a job, if they've even gotten a job. And in Colorado, what you're going to see here is that we created that measure, and we look at that on a monthly basis with all of our county friends and our executive leadership to understand what are the policy or what are the strategy changes that we can make that ultimately impacts somebody in poverty being able to get a job. What are those evidence-based? Is it subsidized employment? Is it training? Is it education? In order to move that forward. One spin-off in that particular program is called CWStep. This is the subsidized training employment program within the state. What we found by lots of research and working with those in the field that just some time on the job, gaining wages is one that is going to be most successful in helping somebody attain and retain a job out of the TANF program. So in Colorado, we have about 720 participants annually who are working in a subsidized employment program. And what is different about Colorado's approach to this and what you would see if you were to look at other similar programs across the nation is most of those other programs take that income and they count it against somebody's eligibility for a TANF program. So what happens often is if somebody's actually in an employment opportunity, they're gaining wages, it renders them ineligible for the most important supports. They aren't eligible to receive that basic cash assistance they need to pay for housing. They lose their child care. They lose any additional employment supports, and they oftentimes lose some food assistance as well. So it takes away the insecurity while they're trying to gain the very important education or training in order to be successful in whatever jobs they're trying to achieve. In Colorado, we chose to not count that income for that family. And what that does is it makes sure that they continue to build that support, they continue to be secure while they're gaining that really important education and training in order to be successful. We also have in Colorado what's called Rehire Colorado. This employment program focuses on veterans, individuals who are non-custodial parents or having to pay child support, and workers over the age of 50. Doesn't do anything different than what we just talked about with CWStep. Again, these are evidence-based, work-based strategies where individuals are learning on the job very important skills in order to be employable in this really strong market. And what we found here is that 925 individuals have been placed in subsidized employment, and this is just data for about a 6-month time period. 754 of those individuals have actually secured unsubsidized employment after exiting our program. The wage at which they are gaining is at $12.35. And then 77% have been able to decrease their benefit amount or discontinue public assistance, meaning, you know, they just don't need that additional help right now. What's really exciting about both of those programs is that we don't stop at just the any job. Again, we want to get that better job. So most of our strategies and our work are really working towards how do we help them get a livable wage in Colorado. Individuals who are experiencing this program generally continue to receive supports from case managers and or other employment supports even after they exit, again, because we're hoping that we're able to help them move forward into a livable wage job. You heard Doreen, when she opened, talk about some of the policy changes within the SNAP program, so I won't necessarily get into this, but why this is important, again, is as individuals start to gain more income and get more education and training towards that employment, we don't want to render them ineligible for assistance. That's going to be really most helpful to them so that they don't experience that cliff effect sooner than they need to. Also equally important, and you heard this, how do you really set the stage for an individual to be able to save? How do you set a stage for somebody to even be able to really work through financial management? Colorado is one of the first states to really move from what's called EBT cards into bank cards. That should say bank cards, sorry about that. Which then gives the opportunity for us to look at how do we continue to grow individuals' assets moving forward, how do they get familiar with the banking system, things of that nature. Asset limits, and here's where I'm also very proud of some of Colorado's work, again, recognizing that oftentimes as individuals start to save, they very well could be considered ineligible for some of the public assistance program. In Colorado, we choose not to have an asset limit or asset test on our public assistance programs such as SNAP, and you'll see how we are an outlier in SNAP, and even more so an outlier in the Temporary Aid for Needy Families program. Again, all with the basis of the more that we can help families save, secure families in terms of the type of assistance that they need in order to be successful in their employment. So that's an overview of some of the policy decisions. There's many, many more that our dynamic state and county and customers work through, and I will look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Katie. I'm pleased now to introduce Mary Badarian, who is Director of Garfield County's Human Services Office, but perhaps more importantly, she's an alum of GSSW, and she's an agitator. Thanks to her, we actually have extended our MSW program and offer an MSW out of Glenwood Springs as our headquarters, and she was the one that instigated all of that. So we're delighted to have you here and to represent also a rural perspective. So thanks for driving in today, Mary.
Good afternoon, and I also want to say we are so fortunate to have Miss Katie Griego at the State Department. You heard what Colorado does differently, and it makes our work out in the counties so much easier and more rewarding for our customers. And also, we are very fortunate to have the University of Denver. So we can zip through this slide. We do work very hard in Garfield County on expanding opportunities for all of our residents. I'm very fortunate to have a Board of County Commissioners who is very dedicated to their residents, and during the height of the recession, just as an example, one of my commissioners asked me, Mary, I need to know who is going hungry in this county. Is there, who are we not able to reach? And I said, well, we have 28% Latina population. Many of them are undocumented, and our undocumented folks are struggling with finding resources for food. Took it upon himself to drive an effort, a private effort, to make sure that no one in Garfield County would go hungry and that they did have access. So I'm very fortunate to have the support of county government, and I'll take this moment to, I know Doreen Peterson had encouraged you to go into state government. County government is where it meets the ground, and you can really get some things done on a local level. So if you could go to the, sorry. I'm used to, you can tell I'm used to having this done for me. What did I do? That one, wrong button. Okay, a lot of data on one sheet here, but the reason I included this, at the height of the recession, we were at about 25% of the population in Garfield County was on public assistance. And I don't know, I should probably explain where Garfield County is for those of you who don't know. Glenwood Springs is our county seat. We're a rural resort county surrounded by much wealthier rural resort counties. We adjoin Pitkin County, Eagle County. Summit is just up the road. So we have traditionally provided a lot of the workforce for the resort counties. When they were struggling, we were very much struggling. So at the height of the recession, we're about a fourth of our population, as I said, was on public assistance. This covers the last 3 years, 2016, 17, and into 2018. You can see at the graph at the lower left, we have come down. The western slope counties have not recovered from the recession at the same rate that the Front Range has. It's taken us longer. We are very much in recovery, as you can see, but at the height of the recession, just using the Medicaid, individuals on Medicaid data there, we were between 14 and 15,000 individual lives on Medicaid. So you can see we haven't come down that far. Medicaid is a good, or Health First Colorado Medicaid is a good indicator. That crosses just about all of the public assistance programs. But you can see we still have a substantial number of folks who are on public assistance in Garfield County. About 60% of our folks who are on public assistance are working. The rest are, or the majority of the rest are older residents and children. So, and the disabled population. So, our folks are working. They're underemployed, and a lot of that we're dependent on the construction industry and supporting the cyclical resort activities. And right now we're having a real challenge with the high cost of construction, and that's really putting a damper on our employment. So moving on to the next, the way we meet this challenge in Garfield County, it's an all hands on deck. The county governments, we are very regionally minded. We do a lot of work with Eagle and Pitkin counties from the government level through all the departments on economic development activities. We have a very large nonprofit, which you'll see on a subsequent slide, very large segment of our nonprofit agencies are also dedicated to supporting people to get back to work. And Colorado, we're fortunate to have Colorado Mountain College, which also partners with the county and the University of Denver to promote social work in the county as well. But it's all about collaboration. As you can see, our two work programs in Garfield County are TANF, Colorado Works is our temporary assistance to needy families in Colorado, and Employment First. Employment First is a food assistance program for able-bodied adults without dependent children. They're required to participate in orientation. The secret there, it's not, as Katie was saying, it's not showing up, turning in a paper, going to, having, scheduling 3 job interviews. That's kind of the old TANF. To really be a support and a help to people, you need to help them develop a career path and to meet the needs of your local employers. So we're very, very fortunate to have Colorado Mountain College in our region, and they are very responsive both to the employers and to students. They can switch programming quickly to supply students, graduated students. They do certificate programs, assistants, the associate's degrees, a number of those. We'll get to those later, but it's all about collaboration in the rural counties, in all of the counties, but particularly I would say in the rural counties where our resources aren't always as great. So our largest collaborators are Colorado Mountain College, Colorado Workforce, and the Housing Authority. We also collaborate very much with the health industry. We're all involved in the West Mountain Regional Health Alliance, and housing is our #1 priority that we work on in our public and private health industry. This is very, very brief. There's so much more that they offer, and we don't have time to go into all of this, but these are specific to our temporary assistance to needy families folks programs. Many of these, and so classes for GEDs, vocational certificates, associate's degrees, assistance with applying for financial aid, basic knowledge of computers, resume writing, parenting, there's just a plethora of services that is by no means comprehensive, and I'll go into more detail there. The Workforce Center, we're kind of the front end with the most vulnerable population. Our TANF customers are the most vulnerable, and so a lot of this programming is dedicated to them. Workforce Center kind of picks up once they, with a little less challenged group of folks. So we all work together, and we support each other on the populations, but we see a little bit different population there. We get them up to the point where they can have a sustainable career. A lot of the folks coming into our Workforce Center now that the recession is finally declining are able to go right into jobs. Subsidized employment hasn't been really effective in some of the rural counties, as it isn't in Garfield. 64 counties, every county is different, because job-ready folks are able to get jobs. There's a lot of competition for employees. These are some of I mentioned the nonprofit agencies. These are some of the nonprofit agencies who provide workfare sites for our Employment First customers. So those are the folks, the able-bodied folks on food assistance who need to be involved in the orientation classes and activities. And all of these agencies actively provide work experience. Most are volunteer. Some are supported, but often they wind up hiring our folks once they've completed their obligation there. And this is a very small segment of our nonprofit. You can't turn around in Garfield County without running into a nonprofit. We have a Human Services Commission that's comprised of several additional nonprofit organizations, but these actively work with our case managers and Employment First to provide opportunities for those folks. These are the four major programs provided by Colorado Mountain College. We have our go-to-work computer skills workshops. Again, these are very short lists of what's available there, but they're open to all. Primarily, that would be the TANF eligible folks. The PRORA folks would all be able to use this, but these are open to the entire community who are struggling, and they have campuses throughout the region. The Gateway Link to Success classes, that's a contract that we have directly with Colorado Mountain College, and at the Rifle campus, they're offered for parents who qualify for TANF, and they do a great thing at Colorado Mountain College. It's not, like I said, it's not handing in a paper. The coaching and mentoring is what works in these classes. So, and asking, what do you want? What are your goals? How can we help you get there? It's not prescribed. It's whatever they need is what is provided, and that's available to them. And there are a number of programs and that they can be involved in. Some folks need more help, some folks need less. But it's very much a coaching, mentoring relationship, both with the instructors at Colorado Mountain College, the Enterprise, Garco Enterprise, our case managers. We all work with each individual. Every TANF family is a separate TANF family. The Women in Transition program, I love this program. Each participant in this program starts out with $2,000 from us to go towards tuition, books, whatever they want to spend it. Usually it's hard services. And then as they work their way through the Women in Transition program, they are educated as to how to get through that post-secondary experience. They get practical, pragmatic knowledge as they're entering at whatever level they want to enter in. And then, as you can see, Colorado Mountain College can bolster that with up to $62,000 in supportive funding for the students. This is an amazing program, and I just want to I know I'm probably going to run over, but I promised my gals, I asked them to give me a few write-ups, and they asked me to tell you about Gina. So if you'll bear with me, I just want to read the story of Gina. And they supplied a number of stories. They were all except they all had someone that they just felt like there were a couple of two generation families that had made their way up the ladder, but they asked me to read this to you about Gina. In July of 2013, Gina applied for TANF benefits in Garfield County. Gina sat before me looking physically and mentally exhausted. She stated that she did not want to be in Colorado and that she wanted to go back home because she was concerned about the father of her children and did not feel she could raise her kids on her own. She went on to explain that two friends from Glenwood had driven her home in Nevada driven to her home in Nevada because they were concerned for her safety and brought her back to Garfield County to live with them. Gina was caring for her 3-year-old son and expecting another child the next month. She was in a domestic violence situation with the father of the children. He was also mentally ill, abusing drugs, and was a fleeing felon. We discussed using diversion funds and sending her back to Nevada because that's what she wanted to do when she sat down with the case manager. But I also explained our TANF program to her and how we could help her get on her feet, get an education, and take care of kids in a healthier environment. She agreed to give TANF a try and began participating in the program in November of 2013 following her maternity leave. After successfully completing the LINK program, she began interning for a local marketing company where she was taught how to manage their clients' social media and websites. This was a great fit for Gina and inspired her to began attending Colorado Mountain College in January of 2014. In 2017, Gina earned her associate's degree in digital media marketing and is currently working towards both her bachelor's and master's degree in network operations security. In 2016, Gina became over income for any government benefits as she was hired by Colorado Mountain College to teach the same computer classes that she used to attend in Link. She also does freelance marketing, hosting work, and just purchased her first home. Gina is always looking for ways to get involved with our customers that are currently on TANF. She tells them that she hopes that her journey inspires them because she feels that if she can do it, anyone can do it. And she is not the only TANF recipient who comes back and helps to coach and mentor in this program. And I really firmly believe that that is what it takes, is that one-on-one connection, the support of the whole community, dedication from county government to private industry, and here is an example of some of the programs that Colorado Mountain College currently offers, and these are their successful students. I didn't talk much about my most the program that I'm most excited about. If I could step back, if I can just mention that as a great collaboration that happened in Garfield County. Katie will tell you that there are some of your TANF recipients are never going to be able to get a GED. They're going to take the class 3-4 times. It's not going to happen. We had a core of women at one point who they had skills, but they could not pass a GED. They couldn't get into the traditional way of advancing. So the county government, county commissioners, CMC with DHS, went to the county commissioners with a program for an industrial sewing. Couldn't pass a GED, but they could learn to sew. So the county put up donated the building space, renovated it into an industrial sewing facility. Our TANF, and this is just limited to our basic cash assistance recipients, and they learn industrial sewing. We do have companies that will employ them in the area. We've had some graduates open their own businesses, but more importantly, they learn everything from, we have a wonderful group of women entrepreneurs in the area. Graduates work in the program. They learn every end of operating a business, and many of them have gone to have successful careers. In that, we supply the X Games with swag bags. When Carbondale went to all cloth bags, we supply Carbondale with all of their cloth bags. Aspen, we supply them with their cloth bags. Aprons, whatever. I think Julie Crow, when she was in Doreen's position, left there with armfuls of items that they sew. So I think the key is know your local area. Get to know everyone who is connected and cares about your citizens in both private and public, in both the private and the public sector. Create enthusiasm and partner.
Mary. So let's turn the mic over to you all, and just a reminder around our text ability to put your questions on the screen. I appreciate, Trina, how you framed this, not only in terms of the data, but also a theoretical perspective and some possible solutions, which then it was great to hear how they were actually showing up in Colorado, not only at the state level, but the local level. So who wants to get us started? Let's take one off the screen here. Given the disproportionate incarceration of people of color, especially black and brown men, how can we address barrier from, and then it stops. How about let's just fill in the blank that in terms of serving all folks in Colorado and thinking about ethnicity as a lens of disparity, but then also gender dynamics. You all mentioned women or single parent households. What about men in terms of the programming? Anyone want to address that? Go ahead. You'll have to speak into the mic so that.
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry. Is that good?
Is it turned on?
Okay.
Yeah, it's on.
Is it on?
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll lean in a little bit. Yes, I didn't want to give the impression that we only work with women. That may have come up. We work with single parent families and two parent families in TANF, and we have a majority of our Employment First program do happen to be men in Garfield County. A lot of them are come from the construction and oil and gas industries. So you target your programs for the needs and for the individual. And closer to the mic. Okay. So yes, we do give as much attention to the men as we do to the women. It's whoever comes in the door and has a need and can use some help in getting to where they need to be.
Katie, do you want to address that, or the one that's
Yeah, I would
directed to you?
just add to that there needs to be some intentionality around the programming and the services that are offered. And so understanding which programs are serving who, when, is certainly helpful. And so I would say a lot of the intentionality that Colorado has stepped forward with through the two-generation, I didn't talk about that, but the two-generation approaches look at both the child and the parent in the family, whether that is a female or male. It also, and a lot of times, is looking at the family unit, and by that means somebody who might not be the custodial parent or somebody who's not caring for the child in their home. Oftentimes they are incarcerated. So there are, depending on different counties within the state, several different intentional programs about training or retraining individuals who are incarcerated and getting ready to exit. There's also an opportunity to connect with individuals who are incarcerated. We have a particular program in Arapahoe County. For those of you who are not familiar, that's the Aurora area, just right down the street, where they actually have staff in the prisons who are providing services, both employment services, but also connecting individuals to food assistance as they're leaving. Denver County does something very similar. And so what I would say is it's the same concept, but it's also understanding the barriers of those individuals who are incarcerated, and also being a little bit more proactive through the two-gen approach of the life skills, the parenting, so that we don't repeat that. So it's not just targeting the adults, it's also targeting the child, so that we don't have repeat offenders and or children following footsteps and having the same struggles.
Great, thank you. Trina, there's a question for you around the limitations of TANF and breaking the cycle of poverty, so addressing some of the two-gen pieces. And it was interesting in that all three of you addressed TANF. So what are your reflections on that?
I have nothing against TANF per se. I think one of the issues with some of the policies in the U.S. is they're always very, very targeted. So there are particular eligibility and particular people. So that's why one of the policy recommendations they made in terms of expanding EITC. So it's a great program for those that it serves, but it needs to maybe bring in more single men, because that's not what it's targeted for per se. And I think also perhaps, you guys know more about housing than I do, but even with housing programs, a lot of people are eligible but don't actually get the spaces. So thinking about ways that we can expand programs so that all people who are poor, or more the people who are kind of facing these structural barriers, aren't left out. And so I think TANF, for what it does, can be really good, but there's a lot of population it doesn't serve. Actually, we had a great speaker who came to University of Michigan and said that it actually is a pretty good program for maternal leave. So if you don't have a kind of paid leave at your job, you can kind of go on TANF for 6 months to a year, and it might work pretty well for you. But for people who don't have high levels of education, who have a lot of structural barriers, who are in for long periods of time, they come up against those time limits, it may not be so good. So thinking about what programs are good for whom and how can we find ways to serve more.
Great, thanks. Good. Question in the back of the room.
Hello, I have a question in regards to these housing programs. Are they then felon-friendly? Is that what I'm understanding?
To me? So we are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, and we provide first-time homebuyer education and housing counseling to whomever. And we do work with a group called Peer One, which is felons, and we're trying to educate them on financial literacy to empower them and help them, give them that tool set. DHA, I don't know if DHA takes felons or not, so I have to plead ignorance on that one.
Okay, all right, we have another one.
I actually have, I guess, two questions, a two-part question. So first, I'm interested in hearing if any of you know anyone who's doing work that's combining both education and jobs with the idea of also wealth building. So we heard from DHA and their approach, but also just with maybe that population that wouldn't necessarily fit into that criteria, maybe the most vulnerable, those who are receiving TANF. Does anyone know anyone in Colorado who's doing that? Is there funding available? What does that look like? And then my second question would be that there's been a lot of proposals lately on the national level in terms of taking individual opportunity accounts or trusts for children, or also looking at giving lump sums, kind of wealth distribution. I think that in the last political cycle, there's been a push to think more broadly and about those ideas. I'm just curious to hear if any of those are being talked about at the state level as well.
Let's take the last question first and have maybe Trina address that one.
This is kind of an interesting debate within the field. So there's two people, Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity, who have these ideas about reparations, having trust funds that are maybe $20,000, $30,000 as opposed to maybe starting with $500, $100, $1,000. And of course, I am all for redistribution, and if we could have accounts that had more money in them. But I think the point that Michael Sheraton has made is until we get to the point where there's a public will to do major redistribution to kind of really redress historical wrongs in the system that we have right now, getting people engaged in the larger economic system to not be completely left out is a good starting point. And another thing that happens in the Lansing account, we only start with $5, and some people think $5, that's nothing. But what they're able to do is that they're able to build on other things that exist. So they start with a $5 child savings account and get young people to make deposits of 20 cents or whatever they bring in. It's not very much money, but then when they get to 6th grade, they're eligible for the HOPE scholarships. And so if they make a certain GPA and graduate or get into a college from 6th to 12th grade, they have money. And then they have a Lansing Promise that gives you money to go to certain schools. And so what it does, it gets parents and children thinking about their futures. And so the money itself isn't all that much, but it links to other opportunities that exist. And actually people want to be a part of something that's successful. So everybody wants to be now part of this SHAPE, opportunity structure that helps our children do better. And so I think that if you can start getting people to kind of expand, who is eligible and who deserves a future and who we ought to be thinking about in terms of long-term opportunities, I think that's a starting point, even though I would love for these accounts to have more and more money over time, if that helps.
So the first question was around combining both education and work or job training, and if there's anyone else really doing that in the state besides DHA. Mary, I see you get your finger up. Yep.
Yes, actually that's part of the Griego enterprise program with Colorado Mountain College and some of the other programs they have. An example would be there is a great need for personal care workers right now, especially with our growing aging population. So they offer a certificate program. The the companies that hire the personal care workers are active in our area, and there's a high turnover right there. But so they're employed as personal care workers while they're finishing. They quickly get their certificates. They're employed. Many of them, if they like what they're doing, then they go on and go on to the CNA. We have a number of those. They also have the nursing school there, as does Mesa, and so they just step up, and that's intentional. That, as Katie was saying, I like that word. That there's a clear path that they can start at one level, be making money at that level, move up. They're still on public assistance, still receiving child care assistance as their degree goes higher or they get more involved in the field. That's just one example. There are a number in the enterprise, the Garco enterprise. The skilled trades is another example. Welders, there's always a shortage of welders. We turn out a lot of welders in Garfield County in the region.
The City and County of Denver also awards grants for education and employment programming throughout the city. We are recipients of one of those grants, and our programming is not limited to DHA. It's low and moderate income across the City of Denver. One of those program components is our Youth Employment Academy, which runs a cafe over on 1099 Osage, and it trains youth to work in culinary and then helps them they get paid there and then they get placed out in jobs.
Great. One final question or reflection? Yeah, in the back. You're going to make us run. Abby's on it.
Talked a little bit about the cliff effect, and that seems to be a pretty big collective challenge that we face when we're talking about wealth building. And you talked about how the wage subsidy program helps to mitigate that. What are other policy solutions that we're looking at either the state or national level to help mitigate the cliff effect, to help people transition as they earn more income and receive less benefits?
So I'm going to approach that in kind of a dual way. I believe very firmly that you have to look at it in terms of the education, the training, and the employment, so that, again, somebody's on that right path to not just get that first job at a minimum wage, but they're really into a livable wage job. So if they are going to experience the cliff effect, it's either for a very limited time because it's there, or it's in a way that there's other supports that can come around, which leads to what are the policies, right, that can impact the cliff effect. And I would say there's several things that we do recently that are really important pieces of that. Number one, we don't count financial aid for public assistance programs in Colorado. That's also something that I didn't mention in my earlier comments about assets. That actually is part of those assets from our view. That's very unique in Colorado. Not many, I don't believe actually, in fact, any other state does that for both the SNAP and TANF programs. The other piece that we talked about is allowing for individuals to have assets and have savings accounts, not only for themselves, but for their children. Again, other states don't generally do that. One of the more meaningful policy changes that we did about a year ago that I encourage our other states to look at is called transitional food assistance. So what's happening with transitional food assistance is somebody has become ineligible for TANF. They're still generally eligible for food assistance. And what it's doing, it's locking in their food assistance at the same amount that they were receiving, so they don't reduce the TANF at the same time that they're reducing SNAP. And so that's definitely something that we've heard from families as a very helpful piece of this. Similar is childcare. So instead of fluctuating what we call parental fees, when somebody gets employed, we lock in that parental fee. So as they're losing the cash benefit, they aren't also having to pay more in child care for low-income programs. So there's several ways that I would say states can be a little bit more intentional about the type of policy that they implement. But what we're hearing from our families, we have what's called the Colorado Works Leavers Study. What that means is somebody who's leaving the Colorado Works program or TANF program. We're asking them how did they experience our program. That cliff effect is still very real for our families. So as Trina was saying, you have to start looking at what are the earned income tax credits that can be applied. In Colorado, we're very fortunate to have a state one, not just the federal one. Very, very important to these families. And I would also say there's more opportunity to expand on that in a further degree. There's also an opportunity to expand on some of those other policy choices that I talked about.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. We're going to try and regain some time. The next panel is standing between you and a glass of wine. And so let's do a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll kick off with the second grand challenge today. go ahead and find our way to our seats. Proceed now to discuss financial capability and asset building for all. I'm delighted to introduce our plenary speaker. So Professor Margaret Sheridan shares more than just a last name with our keynote speaker. They have shared and developed a body of work together. This truly has been their life's work and a partnership for impact. Professor Margaret Sheridan has focused her work on financial capability for a number of years, having started first with research around microenterprise and what it takes in terms of credit and those initial asset accumulations to be able to launch a small business. And that work actually informed that, oh, people carry quite a bit of debt, and oh, people struggle with how they actually think about economic and financial concepts in their lives and can proceed in terms of economic sustainability. She's written 7 books, actually, on this topic, and her most recent one I love, and especially for the social work students that are in the room, it's really thinking about what's the role of social workers in doing financial capability work. So she's actually produced a textbook around financial capability that can be used in social work programs. Her work also has touched larger issues of social development, everything from immigrant mothers to international volunteering, and a lot of that was informed by her travels and her work and living in other countries. She's retired now, but it doesn't look like it from from the 80 hours a week I no doubt know she puts in. I also know personally that she values the human story that is in the data and has really played an important role in CSD's work by advancing the qualitative research that often brings those numbers to life. And I know that because she taught me how to think, how to do qualitative research, and how to write. I'm honored to know her and delighted that she's here today. Professor Margaret Sheridan.
Thanks, Amanda. It's very good to be here. Thanks to Jeff. I guess Abby's out of the room at the moment. There she is back there, a great organizer. And it's really exciting to hear all of what's happening in Colorado. I mean, you know, I read about Colorado all the time and research and in this, especially in the area I work in financial capability and asset building. But you know, to actually see the people who are responsible for implementing the projects and those who are working in the programs, this is a real pleasure. So when I began teaching a long time ago, I started, the students came to my classes. They knew quite a bit about social programs, social assistance programs, income support programs, things like that. But I was quite surprised. This wasn't too long after the Earned Income Tax Credit was enacted, and it wasn't as large a program in those days as it is now, and certainly not as, didn't provide as much money. But I worked in a state university, and many of my students were parents, low income, struggling to make ends meet, being in the classroom and working after hours, and many of them did not know about the Earned Income Tax Credit, and they were eligible for it. I thought, wow, now this is interesting. So over the next 10 years or so, I started introducing more and more information, not just about household budgeting, but also about federal budgeting, state budgeting, financial matters that social workers weren't really getting a very good handle on. And what I found was the students were very interested. They really wanted tools. When they were working with families, they wanted to know how they could really help with the bottom line, how they could help families save. They hadn't heard about a lot of the things that were happening at the state and the federal level. So I invited, because I am not a financial management expert, and those who know me really understand that, I invited an economist to co-teach a class with me on household financial practice for social workers. And the students surprised us. We had a great semester. It was crazy. It was a lot of work, but it was fun. At the end of the semester, the students presented us with a petition signed by every student in the class that this ought to be a required course in social work. So we thought, I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll try. So over the past, say, 15 years or so, we've been developing materials and inviting people to join in an effort to do this kind of work. We've developed concepts, we've conducted a lot of research, we've written books, and when the grand challenges were announced in 2015, we were ready. We submitted a paper on the importance of financial capability and asset building for all. We call it FCAB for short. So let's see if I can. So let me back up a bit, and I'm not going to recap the data that have been presented already, but I do want to emphasize one thing. Our country, indeed our world, is undergoing a huge transition. For low-income families, this transition has often had big and often harmful effects. Not only has financialization and growing financialization creates barriers for the poor and vulnerable, what we mean by that is the growing influence of financial markets, financial transactions, financial relations that make people's lives much more complicated. All of our lives are more complicated, but it's also made many of our fellow country people more financially vulnerable. And this is especially true of racial and ethnic minorities, of people who live in poor communities, and other vulnerable groups. No longer can families survive on cash. You just can't do that any longer. First, the banks closed in low-income communities. Now it's the ATMs closing in low-income communities. Families are thrust into using many different kinds of financial products and services. Without a credit card, people have a hard time managing financially. They're often forced into using predatory financial products like payday lending and other high-interest loans. And this leads to stress, the kind of stress that Trina was talking about. It leads to shame. People feel ashamed and quite often are unwilling to talk about their financial troubles. In fact, they may be more willing to talk about sex than about their financial troubles. So millions are not just money poor, they're also credit poor. An estimated 45 million people do not have a credit history or have unscorable credit records. This is research done by the Bureau of Financial Consumer Protection. I'm gonna trip over this because the name was just changed. I'll use an example to illustrate how financialization is making life so much more complicated and difficult for millions of people. In our book, this is the book that Amanda just, which is kind of heavy, just mentioned, we follow 4 families through the whole book. It takes place over 3 years, and we try to explore how the financial situation that people are in, but also how the financial providers are responding and how social workers can respond to those situations. So in this book, we follow the case of Yolanda. It's a complex case, but she's a certified nurse assistant. She lives in Jackson, Mississippi. And Yolanda has what is called bad credit in collections. Because of a medical debt, she's unable to borrow money at a reasonable rate. If she were, and she's not, but if she were looking for a job or an apartment, or if she was trying to sign up for utilities, if she was trying to get a cell phone contract, she would have difficulty. If she was trying to buy insurance, she'd be paying more, and so forth, all because of her medical debt. Because of this and a number of other challenges in her life, she feels really overwhelmed. but she's actually a very highly functioning person. Her 19-year-old daughter is a single mom. Tamika is even worse off. Tamika is what they call credit invisible, meaning she doesn't have a credit record at all. She's not on a route to getting a credit record either, for a number of reasons which are spelled out in the book. This makes it even more difficult for her to manage her financial life, and it creates a series of challenges for her that suggest a tough road ahead. Trying to balance too many things here. So, where do the money and credit poor turn for help? Well-to-do families can afford financial help. They can go to an advisor or planner. They have job benefits and tax policies that build their family's financial security. We just heard about some of those. Meanwhile, disadvantaged families mostly make do on their own or turn to family and friends. Many fall prey to late-night television, financial and legal advisors, and predatory schemes that promise financial relief. Some get help from a patchwork of organizations, such as consumer credit counseling, financial empowerment, we just heard about housing counseling, community credit unions, but it is very much what we would call a patchwork of support. So, what about social work? Day in and day out, human service workers and the organizations and their staff deliver support and services to financially vulnerable populations. In the progressive era, 100 years ago, social workers actually addressed household finances, but abandoned this work in the course of the 20th century for the most part. We're coming back to it. Now, there's a resurgence of interest and work on financial capability. And this illustration, Katie's going to take this up. This is her organization, NEFI, the National Endowment for Financial Education, that just did a report of research that we conducted with faculty in social work. So my question is, do social workers ask Yolanda and talk to her about her medical debt? And if they do, what do they do about it? So I want to backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about our framework that we use. And importantly, this is not on the slide, but behind all of this, if you think of a watermark behind this graphic, is the social worker's perspective of person and environment. So when we think about financial capability, we're talking about both the individual's ability to act as well as their opportunity to act. And that is what we believe really leads to financial well-being. And financial well-being we're defining as income, assets, spending, credit, and protection. This theory is also based on capability theory. Those of you who are familiar with Amartya Sen, Martha Nussbaum's work on capability theory is very actually reminiscent of our person and environment perspective in social work. They didn't get it from us, but you know. So improving people's ability and opportunity to act involves both macro practice and micro practice. So developing and advocating for inclusive and progressive programs and policies, and we've talked about a couple of these in this session so far, providing income, financial services, asset building, employment and business development, and financial counseling and education, as well as micro practice, thinking how we work with clients and communities to improve financial well-being, teaching financial management, assessing client financial condition, not just are you eligible for this service because your income falls under a certain means test amount. How to set and meet goals. And goals really should be bolded and sparkling, because all of this work, just like all of our work in social work, is all about what the individual is really going to be working towards accomplishing. We can't sit down and say, here's a household budget, you need to follow this. Creating spending plans, resolving financial problems and conflicts, and enabling asset accumulation. And I'm not providing a lot of the data behind this. I have the citations, and there's a very long list of resources that you'll see at the end. It is essential that we develop a financial capability delivery system that reaches everyone. And we actually are very fortunate to have with us another colleague, Lydia, who's going to talk about one of really the most interesting things that's happening across the country in this regard. We need to embed financial capability services in human service organizations and practices that already exist. So this includes things like the financial clinics, Change Machine, and some of you may be familiar with that opportunity, which is really an online opportunity for human service workers to become very conversant and able to deliver financial capability services. We can talk more about that if there's time at the end. We need to integrate FCAB, what we call FCAB, into human services, and that's what Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund is very active in doing. Provide financial education, financial accounts, and savings accounts for everyone. And I really want to emphasize what both Michael and Trina have talked about so far, that when we're talking about inclusive, it means inclusive. It means everyone. It doesn't just mean people who have a job. It doesn't just mean people who have over a certain income or under a certain income. It means everybody. And we may even get to the point, a colleague of ours, Jean Huang, has proposed a financial capability gateway. I think not that far off in the future. We were just talking, Jason and I, about India. There are countries that really are establishing a system that is far more inclusive. And now that we have the capability, online capability, I think this may be more of a reality, and a sooner reality than we think. So embedding, integrating financial education, and possibly a financial capability gateway. So the vision for this is that basic finance can become a public good. Michael mentioned this earlier. Basic financial services could become a public utility, efficient and safe for all, but with fees like your municipal water system. Why not every child have an account when they're born? I mean, my kids did. Lots of people in the room, probably their children did. Maybe we need to think about that for everybody. Or it could become like a pure public good with no fees other than general taxation, such as our public highway system. We need to have these things set up so people can really use them. It could include a basic account, access to small credit, an investment, an asset account, basic insurance. So I want to stress that financial capability for social work, FCAB, is a unique opportunity. There are a number of areas that in social we have not embraced. One of them, except here at the DU, is civic service, for example. That doesn't belong in any discipline. This area of FCAB also does not belong in any one discipline. It's a true opportunity for social work. Social workers can take leadership in developing approaches, developing collaborations, delivering services to help financially vulnerable gain an a secure economic foothold. In this way, social workers can build on their historical commitment to improving people's financial well-being, Paul Stewart did the research on this. He's a social welfare historian and has looked at how social work did this 100 years ago and how we might think about doing this again. And we did it in collaboration with the home economists, something that we probably ought to be thinking about doing once again. But we have a lot to do. While social workers show interest, they lack preparation. And there are a lot of studies that show that we think we know more about this than we actually do, which is a common problem across the country. But to seize this opportunity, social workers must take up the challenge, and it is a grand challenge in social work that we build financial capability and assets for all. And I want to give credit for this work. This is the paper that we produced. We've produced a number of papers since then. There have been policy briefs and other projects that have resulted from this. Julie Birkenmeyer, Jean Huang, Jody Fry, and others in colleagues around the country have been very involved in this. And I want to also support what was just talked about in the last panel, and that is that we really do have to build collaborations across disciplines, so that in our textbook, for example, Julie Birkenmeyer and I collaborated with Michael Collins, who is an economist, but we've made him an honorary social worker. I'm not sure he's made us an honorary economist, but it was actually a great pleasure working with Michael, because we all brought different strengths to the field. And I often had in fact, we tried to get funding for this and were unable to do it, collaborating with the School of Business and the School of Social Work to train social workers and personal finance folks together to work in the community, because the social workers knew how to work with vulnerable clients, and the personal finance folks really understood the personal finance business, and I thought it would be a great match to bring them together, but I think it was a little bit too off in the future for whoever we were asking money from at that time. So let me just conclude. The Financial Capability Grand Challenge effort is the work of all of the FCAB network, beginning with research, and this is just a sampling, survey of student perspectives, the survey of faculty perspectives, which NIFI worked very closely with us on, mapping financial services, Terry Friedline, Matt Despard, and Stacia West. The education, so before we created the textbook, we created a curriculum and we tested it in minority serving institutions, mostly departments of social work at the bachelor's level, and found a great reception and really positive effects. And my colleague Julie worked with CSWE to create a curricular guide on FCAB. And then we've been taking it to the practice field as well, doing continuing education, doing webinars, and then actually partnering with financial development organizations to place social work students and to develop programming. So this is happening across the nation. It's going international. Our colleague Jean Huang and Li Zhou and others are working with colleagues in China to introduce FCAB in social work. And just last week, actually, they published an article on our efforts in the US in the China Social Work magazine that was disseminated to 300,000 households. So we're hoping to see, and Michael's going off to a conference next week where they're going to be discussing this, and we're putting this all in the hands of our colleagues, and I think they're making great progress. I've also been working with colleagues at the National University of Singapore, and they've taken this curriculum and adapted it to the Singapore context. You can imagine the financial service sector doesn't look the same, the policy sector doesn't look the same, so a lot of changes had to be made to this curriculum to use in the classroom there, but they actually have started their training with practitioners. So they're doing a kind of train the trainers model. They're training folks in the community in about 100 different agencies who will then train within their agency to bring financial capability to social work, to the social work field. So with that, I would like to invite you and your colleagues to the Financial Capability Network. We are happy to bring whoever wants to get involved in our work groups. There are several different work groups and activities. I'm sure the same is true for Trina's project with her colleagues on reducing extreme inequality. And I have to say that we've done a number of things like this where we're working collaboratively because we really think that the two topics obviously dovetail. And I'm happy to talk more about the textbook, how we envision it being used, the proposed financial gateway, how to get involved in the FCAB network, if we have time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate how social work has figured so prominently today, and I hope everyone is taking as a charge that this is really an area where we can have demonstrative impact, and having the work that Margaret and her colleagues have done to lay that curriculum and that foundation, it's there for the taking. So thank you. I'm delighted now to introduce Catherine Sawyer, who's with that funny acronym. What did you say, NEFI? It's the National Endowment for Financial Education. She's spent the better part of 15 years working in this industry in a variety of positions in both the public and private sector, having in her most recent position been more on the investment consulting side of this. But then I think she had the best title ever at the University of Colorado. She was the Director of Financial Wellness, Education, and Research in the administration office there. So I appreciate how you're also bringing the higher ed perspective, the corporate perspective, and personal finance to bear on these issues. So we look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. Oh, let's see.
You probably just have to scroll through
We'll
all my
just scroll
references.
through.
Yeah.
This is not my presentation. All right. So I am an economist, so thank you for letting me hang out all day and learn the social work perspective. It's been really interesting, and I'm just excited to join today. And show of hands, who had never heard of NEFI before, my funny little organization? Okay, I thought so. So I was going to put a slide in to just introduce you to us. So we are a private operating foundation. We are a self-sustaining endowment. We do not take donations. And what this means is we are 100% neutral, unbiased, non-commercial in everything we do for financial education. And everything we put out is free. So happenstance, we're headquartered here in Denver, which allowed me to join this event today. You might assume we'd be headquartered in DC. The College of Financial Planning, back in the day, that's how we got our start. And then we decided to sell off the intellectual property rights for that particular designation. And that's how the endowment was funded. And so we've always had an educational mission, but we just happen to be here in the beautiful Front Range. So education, research, and awareness is how we meet our mission. We've got an award-winning high school financial planning program that's free for all K-12 teachers to use in schools. We've got Cash Course, which is free for all students in any college, and any college or university can use our programming. We've got consumer-facing online resources, Smart About Money, so check us out there. We've got turnkey financial workshop kits for anyone that wants to give a financial workshop. You can go online, download our slide decks and talking points for free and use those. And then if you want to evaluate your impact in financial education, we have an evaluator's toolkit, which is also free. You can go in, you can create an assessment. It's got a question bank you can pull from. You can give it to your participants in your program and track your progress over time. Enough about us, though. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about financial fragility, which is some research that we have funded in the past few years. So it came out of George Washington University's GFLEC, Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center. And it really centers on these numbers that you've been hearing tossed around out there about what dollar amount the average American could not come up with when faced with an emergency. So it looked at 2 data sets, and one anchored on a $2,000 amount, so kind of a mid-size emergency or unexpected expense. And that came out of a 2015 National Financial Capability Study, which comes from FINRA. And then a smaller dollar amount, the $400 that you might have heard tossed around out there, that comes from the Survey of Household Economic Decision Making from the Federal Reserve Board. So from that first sample, one of the questions they asked is, how confident are you could come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose within the next month? You might even try this on for yourself. Where am I with this $2,000? I am certain I could come up with it. I could probably come up with it. I could probably not. I am certain I could not. I don't know, or I prefer not to say. So this study defines financially fragile as these sort of middle two. You either probably couldn't, no, you couldn't come up with it. But if we look at the shed sample, suppose that you have an emergency expense that costs $400. So maybe this is a medical bill that just came up, or a car repair, something that's, really kind of common unexpected, right, in our daily kind of lives. So based on your current financial situation, how would you pay for this expense? So now we're kind of looking at the coping mechanism. How would you fund this? I'd put it on my credit card and pay it off in full at the next statement. Great, good option. With the money currently in my checking or savings account, or with cash, okay, I would just meet that right now. Or our financially fragile folks, I'd put it on my credit card and have to pay it off over time. Again, it's that $400. I would use money from a bank loan or a line of credit. I'd borrow from a friend or a family member. I'd use a payday loan, deposit advance, overdraft. I'd sell something. I just couldn't pay for it, or other. So these bottom coping mechanisms, the second study said, hey, that's another way of looking at financial fragility here in the US. And what did we come up with? Well, using the first measure, that's the graph on the top, 36% of households are financially fragile. So that's really just over 1 in 3. Now the $2,000, okay, that's a little bit of a bigger amount in the next month, right? What's really kind of startling is this 43% down here on the bottom using those coping mechanisms. How would you come up with that $400? And that's 2 in 5 people, right? 40% is 2 in 5 are financially fragile according to that measure, right? Now, we have a whole report on this, so if you want to dig into the data, it's available on our website. And one of the things we pride ourselves in at NEFI is we take really great technical papers, and then we produce a practitioner's version that kind of strips out all the complicated econometrics and statistics and gives you what you need to know. And I think that's what is important about this, is really as social workers knowing the context of what we're dealing with today in the United States. So the underlying factors that we know are associated with financial fragility are a lack of assets, too much debt, and a lack of financial literacy. So we've had some talk today about policies that can help address the lack of assets. Too much debt is another issue, but financial education, financial literacy is something that my organization champions to help with. And it turns out people who are financially literate are less likely to be financially fragile. To the tune here, it's about double if we look at these in terms of percentage point terms, right? So that's an argument to be made for advancing financial education, financial capability, getting education out there to folks who need it. So I'll talk about training intermediaries, and I just wanted to highlight one more time the same magazine cover that Margaret put up. So this is some research that we funded, and again, if you want to read Margaret's paper and all the technical details, great. If you want the abridged practitioner version, you can get it free from our website. So it's all about social workers, all about the research, and it highlights how much financial education is being taught in social work programs today in colleges and universities, and what topics social workers believe are the most relevant to include in their curriculum. So our digest comes out, I think, every other month, and if you want to subscribe, it's just nefi.org, press-room, subscribe, and you can get our news coming out. So one of the things that we highlight in this editorial is the experience we have with K-12 teacher training. So back in 2009, NEFI funded some research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they were looking into K-12 teachers and how they felt about teaching financial education. And basically, less than 20%, so basically 1 in 5, felt very competent to teach personal finance in school. But 89% agreed it was important for students to know. So we identified this gap, right? They're saying, hey, it's super important to teach. Ooh, we really don't feel comfortable to teach it. We're not prepared for that. So out of that was created the Jumpstart Financial Foundations for Educators model. So this was a teacher training program that was piloted in 5 states that was designed to be replicable at a national level by anyone who wanted to. And the premise was, we need to make teachers feel confident in this material. So it wasn't about teaching them, ooh, here's how you do a 3rd grade lesson plan on saving or taxes, right? It was, hey teacher, let's do money one-on-one for you as an adult functioning in the United States right now. You probably have some questions about your finances. You probably feel great about them in some areas, but there's other areas, maybe insurance, that you've got some questions, maybe estate planning that you've got some questions, or really what is in that pension versus 403B versus 401K, right? So the model went to teachers just as adult humans in the US and said, okay, let's create the information that you want to know. Assuming then, as we might increase their competency and their confidence in their own finances, they'd feel better about teaching it in the 5th grade or the 9th grade, because they know how to take a lesson plan and execute that in their classroom. So that was the sort of the premise of this, and we were very excited to see it worked. So their confidence went up from 38% to 80%, and oftentimes these were just like a 3-day training model, a few days of in-service PD training. 91% integrated financial education into their classroom instruction, up from 61%, so that's excellent. But really, where the rubber meets the road were the students then actually seeing any of these gains? And in a 2-year study that we did in Vermont, it showed that students who were taught by these financially competent, trained teachers increased their financial literacy. So I bring that here today because as we're talking about this grand challenge for social workers, you're an intermediary. You are the gatekeeper between the services for your clients. And so if we can increase the level of financial capability and confidence among all the social workers in the United States, we would expect to see the same outcomes in our clients, right? Dependent on their particular situation, but overall, it could be a very replicable model. And one of the things we put out in this last digest that we had is we said, you know what, we found this for teachers. Recent research has suggested it's the same for social workers. Faculty say it's important, but they say, ooh, I'm not really qualified to teach personal finance in my classes. It extends to all teacher helper professions. We're going so far as to say that we don't need to necessarily do more research out there on this. There's going to be a gap between confidence and the importance of teaching it, so let's go ahead and arm the intermediaries with the information that they need to know to be more impactful in their careers. So just a couple highlights from that research. 91% of social work faculty said students would benefit from more finance and economic content than's currently taught. So very mirroring of that teacher survey. And 61% of social work faculty said a lack of faculty expertise was a barrier to them teaching more in their classes. So I'll close with just saying that not everything that calls itself financial education is effective, All right. So at NEFI, we've got our 5 key factors. If you're going to deliver financial education, it should come from a well-trained educator, so someone who's competent and confident in the subject matter, or a tested e-learning protocol, right? It doesn't always have to be face-to-face, but you want a good online experience if you're going to deliver it that way. You should use vetted and evaluated program materials. You should stop writing your own from scratch. There's enough great information out there. We're not the only organization that provides them, but they should be already vetted and evaluated. And then a timely instruction, relevant subject matter, and then you need to assess or evaluate. And I will stop there till questions.
Great, thank you, Catherine. So Lydia Reuter comes at it from a little different perspective. Lydia is the Integrated Services Program Manager with Empowered, and she is representing an organization that actually provides financial coaching, education, and debt management. So she's actually implementing these services. We look forward to hearing your perspective, and she's a social worker.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here for the afternoon. And yeah, I'm honored to be here because I did my undergraduate in social work, and I remember clearly reading articles that the two of you have written that informed some of my research and papers in my undergraduate degree in my Master's of Nonprofit Management. So it's really cool to see you guys here and hear your influence on social work and also the work that I'm in. So I'm also really happy to see I have colleagues in the crowd, our financial coaches here from Empowered, a couple of them, as well as some of our partner organizations, CWE, Center for Work Education and Employment, and Mikasa Resource Center, and some other folks that we partner with around the community. So I apologize, I did not send my PowerPoint in advance, and I can't talk to the MacBook, so I will be looking at my own PowerPoint and hopefully communicate to you what I want to share. So. For those of you that don't know, I work for a nonprofit called Empowered, and we do financial coaching, which is what I'm going to talk the most about today, and particularly financial coaching in an integrated services context. And I really love the slide that you put up earlier about macro practice and micro practice, because I feel like this financial coaching in an integrated services setting really comes at the intersection of those two things and brings about more effectiveness when it comes to asset building and how it can be applied in these different contexts. So I want to just take a second to share about what financial coaching is, because it's kind of an emerging field. And so I want to distinguish it a little bit from other kinds of services like financial counseling or financial education, which is really important to have financial literacy, which impacts, like you showed, financial fragility. But financial coaching is a client-centered and goals-driven experience that is connecting goals to a client's values, and it's a very shared power dynamic between the coach and the client. And you also talked about how important it is that goals are really the driver of what's happening for a client around financial capability, because that's where their motivation and engagement come in to actually take action to make a change in their financial situation. And it's also future-oriented. It's not just about past bad debt or negative things that people might be resolving, but it's also looking toward the future and using future vision as the driver for what will be accomplished. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about what integrated services means for us. So we actually co-locate with other nonprofits and city agencies to provide the financial coaching. So most of that work happens around the community where folks are already engaged with other programs and services and are pursuing other financial goals. So I want to talk a little bit about some examples of what that looks like, because I think it's that intersection of what the clients are doing in these other programs and financial coaching that helps them to really move forward and reach financial goals, to build assets, and hopefully also experience economic mobility. So For example, some of our partners who are here, Center for Work Education and Employment is a TANF provider, and they provide TANF support services, and some of that looks like attaining education, so high school equivalency. Thank you, Stevie, for training me on that. And they also support in career development. And so we know that those things are directly tied to asset building, because you need to have that high school equivalency to be able to obtain jobs that are higher paying. You need to be able to get into career jobs, like Katie talked about earlier, to really move past the cliff effect and to earn more money so that that can go to work for you and you can start saving and building meaningful assets such as home buying. One of our other partners is Habitat for Humanity, and so that's a little bit more obvious about what it looks like for asset building, but we are also working with applicants who want to buy a home. And you might imagine this, but with the affordability crisis that we're facing in Denver, folks are applying for Habitat even if their finances are in the dumps. Even if they have tons of collections and credit cards or whatever, they're looking for that opportunity for affordable housing. And so what we can do in partnership is help them see that vision, that goal of home buying, and then support them in financial coaching to improve their credit, to pay down debt, to save money, so that then they can get to that point of building an asset. We also work with transitional housing through Warren Village, with Mi Casa Resource Center, which provides also career development, but also small business development and access to lending for small businesses, which is, again, really important for asset building, because people are getting the education and the support to build their credit score, but then they're also getting the access to the opportunity to get those loans so that they can build their business, earn more money, and also improve their credit over time. So I just want to wrap up by talking a little bit about how we actually measure success and whether or not financial coaching and these partnerships are working to change people's financial well-being and their financial capability. And so we have definitely been influenced by the CFPB. I can't rearrange the acronym in my head. The CFPB's financial well-being concept. And so they talk about the importance of security and freedom of choice in the present and the future. So control over your day-to-day, month-to-month finances, the capacity to absorb a financial shock, freedom of choice, so financial freedom to make choices to enjoy life, and being on track to meet your financial goals. And so those concepts help to inform our outcomes that we're tracking for our program to determine if people are experiencing that financial well-being. So right now we are still using the indicators that we inherited from the Cities for Financial Empowerment, which are around credit, debt, savings, and banking, which are really important. And we think they're the right indicators. But we're also thinking and being influenced by the financial well-being concept to take that step farther and also think about movement toward goals, which Change Machine and the Financial Clinic are a great influencer in thinking about whether or not people are achieving goals. And then we're also thinking about perception of financial well-being using the Financial Well-Being Scale, which is a survey where people talk about not only what are their financial conditions around credit, debt, savings, and banking, but what's their self-perception about it. And we find that that can vary really widely, regardless of people's actual income status. And so those are helping influence how we're changing our outcomes framework to incorporate these additional data points to really see whether we're moving the needle on financial well-being. So I'll pause there, and we'll move on to the panel portion.
Thank you. Let's open it up for questions and discussions around financial capability. Just a reminder on texting those questions in if you prefer to do that. Yes.
My texting fingers are too tired, so for Catherine, when would a person be able to come and have the training that you offer in order to use some of those modules that you all have online?
So they're just online 24/7, and then if you're talking about, let's say, financial workshop kits, like for training to how to use those, I believe we have webinars on a periodic basis for them, but they're available right now to download, and they've got, I want to say there's talking points with them, and sort of the presenter script that can go along with the slides. So yeah, that's available right now. Financial education workshop kits on NEFI.org.
And I should just add, I mean, there are a lot targeted to particular populations.
Yes, and we've done some partnering with, Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and so, you might find some specific workshops for that kind of population, or
older adults. There's a whole bunch of them, yeah.
I'm going to take moderator's prerogative, and, I learned how to balance a checkbook in my 7th grade civics class in rural Arkansas. And that was a long time ago. But capturing this notion of universal, so what's happened in the last 20 years is that states no longer require civics education for graduation. So it went from all 50 states to now it's down to 20 states that require that. So there's a piece around amelioration, right? So we need services, we need coaching, and even if we have education, we get ourselves into situations like that. But what role do you actually, and Catherine, maybe this really is for you, and thinking about teachers and integrating this into curriculum, is that what's motivating that? And is there a policy lever that needs to be turned back on there?
Well, some states do have academic standards embedded in their curriculum, either for the high school, so maybe it's a class that you need to take in personal finance to graduate. Colorado actually has it embedded from pre-K all the way up to 12. They put it in the math curriculum and the social science curriculum, so if you look at those two sets of content standards, you'll see where the personal finance comes to play. And Colorado does test it, I believe. So some states will have standards, but then not necessarily test them, and some will say, hey, you have to take some class in order to graduate, but it could be any number of these classes. So it really does vary by locality or state as to whether or not it's a required component in a district, whether or not there's any funding put to it in a district, whether or not teachers who are told they have to teach it receive any training in order to teach it. And there's a whole network of organizations out there aimed at training K-12 teachers. But definitely it's sort of I'd say the policy lever there might be at the state level, determining whether or not you want to make this a part of your K-12 requirements for graduation. And then of course at the college level, a lot of colleges are putting into their first year experience or embedding it into other courses. So I think there are options for where we could do this for the younger generation. And then you'll see dividends over time, but then of course to the current pool of adults that missed out on any of those academic opportunities, there's still a lot of work to be done.
This is kind of along the lines of what you're saying. This is for you, Catherine. So there's a lot of research around like just-in-time financial education and it being like important to do when people are coming into something where they need that education. So I was just wondering if you can share some examples of maybe some things, the ways that the students benefit maybe immediately after high school and then maybe a little bit like longer down the road.
Sure. Some of the research that we're looking at that will be, it's a little teaser for it, it'll be coming out, I'm not sure when, looks at states that have financial education standards and how that translates into borrowing decisions for post-secondary education for college students. And some of the promising research shows is that students are more likely to fill out the FAFSA and use subsidized and public loans as opposed to private loans. And they're less likely to have use credit card as financing, which is of course a very expensive way to finance your college. So that'd be one example specifically tied to sort of overall state standards and then overall borrowing behaviors. Yeah.
Then a question. There we go. I'm Dana Nemo. I work for Denver Human Services, and we have an empowered team in our building, which is fantastic. And I have to admit that when I first stepped into this field, the idea of referring many of our customers to financial coaching seemed like a strong disconnect. Highly vulnerable individuals who are trying to either achieve or maintain sobriety, no housing, sleeping on the streets, major mental health disorders, and not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. Financial coaching seemed like a huge disconnect to me working with them. But specifically, my experience with our veteran services team and our employment first team in being able to connect these individuals to their team has been extraordinary. And I think the thing that has been most powerful for me, and which was most important for me on the front end, is that the coaches understood what our participants were going through and were able to treat them with empathy and compassion. And I saw folks come out of their office after a financial coaching session who have literally been disenfranchised by every system on the planet, who were excited and motivated about life because the coaches were able to help them remove debt barriers and other major issues that they had been facing that were helping them or preventing them from moving forward. So it's more of a sales pitch for Empowered than anything, but I think in the context of the people that we work with, it's really important for me that the services that we're connecting them to have some basic understanding of the challenges that they're going through and can treat that with compassion and empathy, and they totally nail it. So thank you.
Thanks, Dana, for sure. Good to see you.
Can I just make a comment about that? In our research and in our work, what we have found is that clients are pretty hesitant, as well as staff, because they think what's going to happen is that somebody's going to tell them how to manage their financial life, and they're usually doing the best they can, and they think they're going to be blamed for their poverty, and they also, I think, believe that there really isn't that much that can be done. And so if they come into programs like these and they find out that it's not just going to be somebody telling them what to do, but actually helping them figure out how they can improve their situation, it's very gratifying. So it's wonderful to hear that you've had that experience from the ground.
The question there in the back.
Amazing work. Kudos to all of you. My question is in regards to recidivism. It's such a good tool. Has this tool been used, do you know of, in Colorado to stop recidivism?
In Colorado, I don't know.
I can just speak. This feels far away. Just in Colorado, we've kind of explored that as a possibility. We don't currently have an integrated partnership with a location where folks are transitioning out of incarceration, but we have had some referral relationships. I think Pier 1 was actually mentioned earlier, and so we've had folks come through that program. But it's an opportunity that I think the city is considering for a future integrated partnership to support that.
There has been some work in asset building and recidivism, right? In incarceration. I know that Carrie Pettis Davis has talked about this a little bit with the smart decarceration movement, but I'm not sure that there's really been a significant.
There has been, but I would call this just scattered, and I don't think we have anything like knowledge about the effects. Yeah.
But it should be done.
Could I offer just one small comment? One thing we do see with folks who are coming out of incarceration often is having to repay restitution as like a major issue that creates a barrier for folks, and so that's often a priority for folks that we are coaching them around, and so I can see where that would be a big integration point for that population.
Professor Shannon Sliva here at the university. She is working on decarceration in a range of ways, and she actually just shared at the break that there are a number of initiatives in Colorado that are pairing this kind of financial advising and coaching with small business development and entrepreneurship training, and there's actually going to be a pitch competition at one of the prisons for those that are exiting to pitch their businesses and then have them be funded by private investors. So it's, I think it's happening in pockets, but certainly not at a scale where it's coordinated. Trina.
Just as a quick follow-up, there's a person named David Pate who is out of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and he does a lot of work on non-custodial fathers who've been in prison who have to pay back child support, and how that is a huge barrier to wealth building. And so there's been, again, not anything national, but pilots, so that if rather than being told your wages are going to be garnished, you have to pay all this money back, and it usually doesn't go to their children anyways, it usually goes back to the state. They find ways that if you start paying currently, we'll dismiss that debt. So it's not quite wealth building, and it's not exactly financial education, but it's thinking about, what are the very real barriers or things that that these young men, or sometimes not so young men, face. And so that's, in his research, he's done quite a bit of intense study and qualitative data on those populations if you're interested. David Pate.
I think that's a really good point, Gina. I think what we know, the financial clinic, for example, the first thing that with so many lower income people are in credit trouble. So this is debt trouble of one kind or another. Financial clinic, one of the first things they do is try to negotiate the debt. So, and it turns out that even in this kind of case where there's a legal obligation, it's negotiable. And what the financial clinic has found, that they very often can cut debt obligations, in half or more by working with the creditor and working out a payment scheme to the creditor to get something, but then the person can get out of debt earlier.
I want to emphasize one thing, though, is that we have these wonderful organizations that we've been talking about, but there is a whole commercial sector which will promise to do that kind of thing, debt negotiation, debt consolidation, with large fees attached up front before they will do any work with you, and may not finish with you, or the client may not finish with them. And this has just resulted in people sort of cycling through where their financial situation is made worse and worse and worse. And then who can blame the clients for not knowing who are the good guys out there? Are you a social worker, or are you one of those people who are going to just charge me money? And so we have a huge problem in front of us from a policy perspective, but also on the regulation side of this work. So anybody who wants to enter into that would be more than welcome.
The wheel of internet death has stopped spinning, and so we have a question that's come in from online. And Margaret, I'm going to pose this one to you, and I'm going to go back to the work that we did in the late 90s in Oklahoma around the role that healthcare debt played in that spiral where people just couldn't see a way out. This is actually the reverse of that then, that once you're in that financial fragile situation, how does it affect one's health, access to health care, medications, that sort of thing?
Well, let's see. This is a Medicaid expansion state, right? We've been living in Missouri, which is not. I was looking at the maps that you were putting up there, Katie. Missouri was not. It's a state income, earned income tax credit, Medicaid expansion, et cetera. Yes, of course. I mean, financial fragility, it has a big impact on people's health ability, certainly ability to get health services. But I think the big story really is that if we don't figure out this is going back the other way. If we don't figure out how to get health care costs for families under control, all these other things are just going to be dwarfed by the efforts that we're putting in. If people are and we didn't pick medical debt by chance in Yolanda's story, because it's such a common story, and because the amounts are so large. You know, we're not just talking about $400, right? We're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that people end up owing. Add to that higher education debt. And, you know, we're just talking about a situation that is not solvable at the family level. We have to undertake policy changes to address these.
Thank you. All right, Jessica, final comment question.
This is pretty basic questions for Lydia. I'm wondering how Empowered is financed, just because with the nonprofit structure and understanding that, and I know that can be confusing to clients as well. And so in terms of referring people there, I just wanted to kind of explain a little bit more about Empowered to them.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Empowered, like most nonprofits, does have a number of different funding sources. But I'll just talk about one of our substantial funding sources is through the City of Denver, and they fund the Financial Empowerment Center. So it actually, the model was born out of the Cities for Financial Empowerment, which started in New York, and they wanted to replicate this nationwide, and they've done so with many cities. We were the first of 5. Their hope was to offer the program for 3 years and then get the cities to create their own Office of Financial Empowerment that would fund it as basically a free city service, and so it is available to anyone in the community at no cost, and so that's part of how it's done.
Wow, who's glad to live in Colorado? Absolutely. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Appreciate you all. So I've found the ideas here not only invigorating, but attainable. It goes back to what Professor Michael Schraden was saying at the beginning around the grand challenges. It's where can we actually have demonstrative change? And you all give me hope. The previous panel gives me hope that many, many things are happening in action at a policy level as well as at a grassroots program level. I've asked Professor Jeff Jensen to just provide some concluding remarks, really serving as a rapporteur to summarize conclusions of the day, and then we'll transition into a reception.
Okay. Oh, yeah,
sure. Okay, let's see here. That there? Yeah. Okay, thanks, Amanda. And thanks to all our presenters. Great to have Michael, Margaret, and Trina with us, and the panelists as well. Katie, Mary, Renee, Catherine, and Lydia, really an outstanding job. So let me just say thank you before I start with my comments. And I've drawn the difficult task of kind of putting this together a little bit, so I excuse my chicken scratch here in my notebook. But a couple things I wanted to just touch on by way of summary. Beginning with each of these grand challenge events that we've had, I'm struck by the incredible kind of passion and commitment that people bring to these particular problems and social conditions. And it really strikes me that there's no, in this case, this is the same as what we've experienced in our other events, a real compelling compassion to do something about financial inequality and inequality and financial capability. And when I think about what we've heard today, we've had very good descriptions, if you will, of the overall state and picture of inequality and financial capability. We've had data shown that that this income inequality and the wealth gap are really significant in our country. This is not new news, certainly, which Trina very eloquently showed us in a number of figures, and Michael and Margaret talked about this as well as these deep differences in opportunity. And many of the strategies that were talked about by the panelists seem to me to be getting at this opportunity structure, so that's very promising, I think good news in that regard. And I think what strikes me too when we think about the overall kind of picture these problems is that these differences place really children at an early disadvantage, that both economically and also socially over time, and that this early disadvantage really becomes permeated over time, and they become the young people that we see in the Grand Challenge area that I work in youth development. And we don't probably give enough credence, if you will, to just how powerful these economic factors and conditions are in the development of young people. So that was a good learning lesson for me, or a reminder for me in the work that we do to pay more attention to that. I'm also struck by how, when we think about the overall kind of state of these problems, how the lack of universal social policies disadvantage many people. We've talked about this for decades in this country, and gosh, I can remember visiting, I think it was Columbia University back in the late 80s, and Sheila Kammerman lecturing me about the importance of these universal social policies and the effects of those around the world that really deter the problems that we come to see. So that's another a longer term, a deeper, complex problem probably to tackle. I also wanted to say a little bit, a second point. The speakers and panelists really note promising or effective, in some cases, strategies to reduce inequality and promote financial capability. I was struck by our Colorado panelists that we seem to be, you seem to be right on the cutting edge of providing these important services, really across different levels, state, as Katie talked about in detail. I was impressed there that to learn, or I came to learn that we're not pitting programs against one another, if that's one way to say that. Okay. That impressed me, because it seems like that's been a long-standing problem in programs addressing inequality and financial capability. Mary talked a lot about the county level efforts, developing really what I thought of as more as human capital, really developing people's skills, again, opportunity based. And Renee in DHA doing some really impressive work around home ownership and moving people out of public housing. And the other work mentioned too in the second panel by Lydia and Catherine was equally impressive, I thought. The idea of financial coaching. I don't know how widely those programs are used, how rigorously they've been evaluated. It'd be good for I know me to learn more about those and relate it to the work I do, but it seems like a very promising kind of an approach. Let's see, what else do I have scratched out here? The last maybe piece I could talk a little bit about is social work's role and contribution to these problems. I think we were really fortunate to hear Michael's beginning about the importance of the social as fundamental idea, the historical contributions of social work. We tend to forget that sometimes. I know I always talk about it in my classes with students, and I really think that's important to understand kind of those historical contributions, where we came from, how we've perhaps waned from some of those traditional approaches that were the core of social work in, say, the early 1900s. Amanda mentioned this band that we have, the house band here. It's no mistake that we call ourselves the Friendly Visitors. Those were the names of the first social workers in Chicago back around 1900, right? So when we play at the annual Society for Social Work and Research conferences, all the senior faculty come up to me and say, "What a great name you got there." You know? And the younger faculty, "What is that? What are you guys? Who are you guys?" Anyway, and I was really impressed with the work too, Margaret, that you you described and what's in your book, which I'll have to get a copy of, the implications of for education and how we can begin to change kind of the landscape in macro and micro practice. I think that's really important. And it strikes you, you're in a field for a long time and you don't realize that, gosh, we're missing a whole piece here in terms of educating students and what they should be getting. And I can kind of say the same in my area of prevention. We also get on a similar kind of soapbox there and say we need more prevention. You know, we think it's really important to start early to prevent behavioral health problems. In our case, well, it's not too different in the case of inequality and financial capability. So I think there's a lot of parallels there. So I think with that, maybe in sum, just to note that I'm impressed that as well that the grand challenges for social work that our field has taken on are indeed making some progress. I think you could see it today in all the talks by our three national guests, and also embedded in that what's going on locally. So that's encouraging. Michael noted at the beginning how broad and sweeping and big these challenges are. And indeed, they wouldn't be grand challenges if we didn't set lofty, high goals. So I'm impressed continually by the work that collectively we're doing in this Grand Challenges initiative. So thanks for coming. I think we're to the end, Amanda. And there's a little bit of wine and food on your way out, I think, in the back, or beverages. So please help yourself. And thanks so much for being with us today.